The orange juice dripped slowly, first onto the white tablecloth, then onto the black uniform, then onto Valentina's hands, which were still holding the tray with the cold fingers of someone who had spent 6 years learning that letting go of things is harder than holding on to them. The Meridian Resort ballroom sparkled as always, crystal chandeliers, linen tablecloths, the smell of old money mixed with perfumes that cost more than she earns in a month. 40 people dressed in formal attire who, all at once, without coordinating, stopped what they were doing to look in a single direction. And what they saw was this: a woman in uniform, on her knees on the white marble floor, picking up with her hands the shards of a glass she hadn't broken. Ashley Whitmore kept walking, her white dress brushing the floor, her heels marking each step like a signature, without turning around, without apologizing, because to her, Valentina wasn't a person. She was part of the decor, and decor doesn't need an apology. From the other side of the room, Ashley's friends were already laughing. Oh, how clumsy! Do they not conduct interviews here before hiring? Valentina didn't look up. Her eyes were fixed on the glass shards on the floor. Small, transparent, each reflecting a light that didn't belong to her. She knew that kind of laughter. She had heard it her whole life, at her Aunt Rosa's house in the service corridors of that same hotel. It was the laughter of someone who can laugh without consequences, the laughter of power when it still believes it will last forever. And then, footsteps. Different. They weren't heels. They weren't the quiet shoes of the waiters. They were firm, deliberate steps with a weight that announces a presence before a person. Valentina looked up without meaning to, and there he was. Lucas Mercer had his gaze fixed on her, not on the uniform, not on the glass on the floor, not on the mess, on her dark eyes that hadn't asked to be seen and yet didn't know how to pretend they didn't exist. The room kept laughing. He didn't. That silence lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds that no one in that room could read, but which changed, without anyone knowing it yet, the course of everything that was going to happen next, because what that man saw in Valentina Cruz's eyes at that moment wasn't what everyone else was looking at without seeing. It was something she herself didn't know she carried, a secret buried 28 years ago, a secret that was going to destroy the most powerful people in that room. Starting with the woman in the white dress who had just walked away laughing. To understand how we got here, you first have to meet her. Valentina Cruz arrived in Miami at the age of 7 with a pink plastic suitcase that had a broken left wheel. It dragged across the floor with a dull thud that her Aunt Rosa couldn't stand to hear. "Stop making that noise," she would tell her. As if the noise were the girl's fault and not the suitcase's. As if the girl had chosen to arrive that way. She never chose anything. She didn't choose to be abandoned by her mother. She didn't choose Rosa's house, which smelled of fried food and pent-up resentment. She didn't choose to grow up in a room shared with boxes of things that no one used but no one threw away. As if the objects had more right to the space than she did. What she did choose, when she was old enough to choose, was to work. At 16, she washed dishes at a taqueria in northwest Miami. At 18, she worked the register at a supermarket that smelled of ripe bananas and cheap disinfectant. At 22, she entered the Meridian Resort through the service entrance, wearing the black uniform she'd ironed the night before and shoes she'd cleaned with a damp napkin because she didn't have shoe polish. 6 years later, she was still entering through the same door. But she no longer ironed her uniform out of fear. She ironed it out of habit, which is worse. Her room was a 40-minute bus ride from the resort, in a faded, salmon-colored building where the elevator never worked, and the neighbor on the second floor listened to norteño music until 11 at night. She shared the apartment with Lucinda, a Honduran woman who worked as a cleaner at a hospital. and who always arrived more tired than Valentina, but always with something saved for dinner. That night, after the juice incident, Valentina arrived and sat on the edge of the bed without taking off her shoes. Lucinda watched her from the kitchen. What happened? Nothing. The usual. Lucinda served 2 plates without asking any further questions. She knew that the usual coming from Valentina meant something that hurt, but that wouldn't be spoken aloud, and she respected that. Because among women who carry their burdens alone, sometimes the greatest act of love is not forcing the other to explain what is already understood. Valentina ate in silence. She thought of the broken glass, of the tiny shards on the white floor, of Ashley's heels walking away without looking back. And she thought, as she sometimes did on difficult nights, of her mother. She had no clear image, only sensations, a scent of cheap jasmine, a voice singing softly in the darkness, hands holding her with a firmness that didn't fit with a farewell. Rosa never spoke of Elena. When Valentina asked as a child, the answer was always the same. Your mom left you because she couldn't handle you. And that's it. There's nothing more to know. Valentina learned not to ask. But that night, without knowing why, the memory of the jasmine came back stronger than other times. And something else came back too. The name embroidered on the old apron that Rosa kept at the bottom of the kitchen drawer and that Valentina had seen only once as a child, when Rosa wasn't there. A name that wasn't Rosa's. Elena V. Valentina set her fork down on her plate. For the first time in a long time, she felt that that name meant something more than what she'd always been told. Lucas Mercer arrived at the Meridian on a Tuesday with 3 suitcases, an assistant who talked on the phone non-stop, and a reputation for being the hardest man to impress in any room. Not because he was arrogant, but because he had seen too much, too many contracts wrapped in smiles, too many dinners where the food was an excuse and business was the poison served for dessert. At 34, Lucas Mercer had learned to read what people didn't say, and what he read most, in almost every room where he was invited, was fear disguised as charm. That's why he spent the first day of Meridian Week observing. He watched as Charles Whitmore greeted people with long, calculated handshakes, how Ashley walked into every room as if it already belonged to her, how the other businessman nodded before Charles finished his sentences, that small, cowardly gesture of someone who's already decided that agreeing is safer than thinking. And he observed something else. He watched as a waitress in a black uniform picked up the broken glass from the floor without anyone offering to help her. And how, in the midst of that moment, the entire room chose to ignore. She didn't look away when he looked at her. He didn't forget that. Ashley did notice that he hadn't forgotten. She noticed because Ashley Whitmore had spent her whole life noticing exactly what powerful men looked at. It was her most honed skill, more than intelligence, more than charm, more than the white dresses she always wore, as a declaration of innocence that no one should believe. That night she called Collins, the resort manager, from her suite. Her voice was soft, her tone not so much. "Mr. Collins, I need the waitress who was in the dining room this morning, the one who had the incident with the glass, to be reassigned to the service floors, away from the main dining room." Collins hesitated for half a second. "Miss Whitmore, staffing assignments are the resort's decision." "Of course," Ashley said. "And the resort wants to keep its best customers satisfied, doesn't it?" Silence. "Of course," Collins replied. "I'll look into it tomorrow." Ashley hung up. She poured herself a drink. She looked out at the illuminated garden through her suite's floor-to-ceiling window and smiled with the calm of someone who already knows how the game will end before the second half even begins. What Ashley didn't know was that that very night, Lucas had called the concierge with a different instruction. "I want Valentina Cruz, assigned exclusively to my suite service for the week. Efficiency, discretion. That's what I need." The concierge jotted it down without asking. The next day, the two orders landed on Collins's desk like two trains on the same track. Collins chose to obey the bigger money, and the bigger money was Lucas Mercer. In the laundry room on the basement level, Doña Carmen had been ironing sheets since 5 in the morning, just as she had been doing for 26 years. She was 68, with the thick hands of someone who had worked her whole life with hot water, and a memory that never forgot anything that mattered. When she first heard the name Valentina Cruz 6 years ago, something stirred inside her chest. When she saw her cross the inner hallway that first day, in her new uniform and shoes polished with a napkin, she had to lean on the table to keep from falling. It was Elena. Not her, of course, but it was her eyes, the way she carried herself, that silent resolve of someone who learned on her own that the world gives nothing away. From that day on, Carmen held on to the secret a little tighter, and she waited. That morning, when Valentina walked through the service corridor on her way to the presidential suite, Carmen called out to her in a low voice, "Sweetheart." Valentina stopped. She looked at the older woman with that instinctive respect one has for people who've carried the weight of the years without breaking. "Do you know me?" Carmen looked at her for a long time, too long to be a coincidence. "I knew someone who looked a lot like you," she said at last. "Many years ago, she worked here." Valentina waited some more. Carmen said no more. She only added quietly before returning to her sheets, "Be careful this week, dear. There are people in this hotel who have a lot to lose, and when people have a lot to lose, they don't care who pays the price." Valentina arrived at the presidential suite with those words stuck in her chest. She knocked on the door. Inside, someone said, "Come in." And for the first time in 6 years of slipping in and out of luxury rooms unseen, Valentina Cruz walked through a door she would never be able to close again. The presidential suite smelled of fine wood and cool air. A huge window looked out onto the ocean, the Atlantic, blue and still, as if it didn't know what was happening inside that building. Lucas was standing by the window, no jacket, no assistant, no visible weight of who he was, just a man looking out at the water with a cup of coffee in his hand that must already be cold. He turned when Valentina entered. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning, Mr. Mercer. Shall I bring you breakfast now? Or would you prefer to wait?" "Now is fine. And don't call me sir, call me Lucas." Valentina nodded without responding. She knew that kind of instruction. Rich men sometimes asked for informality as if asking for a favor, without understanding that informality for her wasn't comfort. It was risk, because when something went wrong, the sir became a sir again, and the blame always fell on whoever had forgotten their place. She poured the coffee. She arranged the plate. She did everything with the precision of 6 years of practice. She was about to leave when he spoke again. "Where are you from?" Valentina stopped. She turned slowly. "From here, Miami." He looked at her with that attention she had already noticed in the lounge. It wasn't the gaze of someone evaluating. It was the gaze of someone listening with their eyes. "And before Miami?" Valentina held the tray against her chest. "Mexico," she said. "Although I don't remember much." Lucas nodded. He didn't ask anything else. And that silence that demanded no more than she was willing to give, was stranger than any question. Valentina left the suite with her heart beating a little faster than usual, not from excitement, from alertness, because she had learned that when something feels different, it's usually because something is about to get complicated. She was right. At 11 in the morning, Collins called her into his office. The face of a man who had received 2 conflicting orders and chose to obey the one that suited him best. "Valentina, starting today, you are assigned exclusively to service in Mr. Mercer's suite." She blinked. "I thought I was going to be reassigned to the service floors." Collins adjusted his tie. There had been a change in instructions. Valentina understood without him saying another word. Someone more powerful than Ashley Whitmore had intervened, and that someone had a name, and that name lived in the presidential suite overlooking the Atlantic. What she didn't know was that Ashley already knew it too. The news reached her ears before noon. And what she did wasn't scream. It wasn't call Collins again. It was something worse. She smiled. Because Ashley Whitmore was the kind of person who smiles when she decides she's going to destroy something. She'd learned it from her father. Charles Whitmore never raised his voice. He just set traps with an architect's patience. That afternoon, as Valentina was putting her uniform away in the locker room, she didn't see Ashley pause for a moment in front of the locker next to hers. She didn't see the small bottle of expensive liquor that Ashley dropped inside, with a movement as natural as someone adjusting their own purse. She didn't see a thing. But Doña Carmen did. She was at the end of the service hallway with a stack of towels in her arms, and she saw every second of what Ashley did. She stood still. She calculated. She clutched the towels to her chest. And she made a decision she'd been putting off for 6 years. Tonight, she was going to open the old cabinet at the back of the laundry room. Tonight, she was going to take out the yellow envelope. Tonight, after 28 years, the time had come. The tip came in at 8 the next morning, anonymous, 2 lines, printed on plain white paper, slipped under the door of Collins's office before he arrived. A housekeeping employee is stealing items from the minibars in the suites. Locker number 14, women's staff locker room. Collins read it 3 times. Then he called security. Then he called Valentina. She arrived knowing nothing. She found Collins standing there, a security guard in the corner, and the door closed. That combination, closed door plus a man standing there plus silence, was a language Valentina knew. It was the language of guilt decided before the conversation. Valentina, we've received a formal complaint. They opened the locker in front of her. The bottle was there, small, made of dark green glass, with a gold label bearing a name she could never have afforded. That's not mine. She said it with a steady voice, without crying, without raising her voice, because she had learned that when a woman like her cries in moments like this, the guilt becomes more solid, not less. Collins looked at her. The guard looked at the floor. While the investigation is underway, you are suspended from service in the presidential suite. Valentina clenched her jaw. She thought of Lucas. She thought of the planted bottle. She thought of the exact moment when Ashley had smiled for no apparent reason. She understood everything in 3 seconds, but understanding doesn't change the rules, and the rules in that hotel were always written to protect those who had the most. She left the office. She walked down the service corridor with her back straight and her hands cold. She made her way to the back hallway, the one leading to the maintenance garden, where no one ever went. She leaned against the white-painted brick wall and closed her eyes. 10 seconds. She allowed herself 10 seconds. Then she opened them. Inside the resort, in the main lobby, Diego was waiting for her. He was 32, wearing shorts, flip-flops, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The kind of smile Valentina had recognized since she was a child. The smile of someone who comes to ask, but arrives as if he were coming to give. "Cousin, it's so good to see you." "Diego, I'm working." "I know. Or rather, you were working, weren't you?" "I heard you had a little problem this morning." Valentina stared at him. She felt her stomach tighten. "How do you know that?" Diego shrugged. "People talk. The hallways in these small hotels are bigger than they seem. Hey, I need to borrow something from you. My mum has an overdue bill and the landlord won't wait. I don't have anything to lend you." "Valentina, we're family." Family. The word fell between them like a stone in dirty water. Valentina thought of Rosa, of the apron with the name embroidered on it, of the years of silence bought with guilt. "Diego, if you have something to tell me, just say it straight out." He looked at her for a moment. He weighed his options. Then he smiled again, but this time with something colder inside. Straight out. Fine. I'm hearing interesting things about you and the guest in the presidential suite, things that certain people would like to know. Journalists, for example. Valentina didn't move. She didn't blink. Do what you have to do, Diego. She turned and left him standing in the lobby. She walked back to the service corridor. Her heart was pounding so hard she almost didn't hear the footsteps behind her. But she heard them. Sweetheart. It was Doña Carmen. Her hands clasped over her apron, her eyes more serious than Valentina had ever seen them. I need to show you something, tonight after the laundry closes. Valentina looked at her. She remembered the words from days ago. There are people in this hotel who have a lot to lose. What is it about? Carmen opened her mouth. She closed it, as if the words were too big for the hallway. It's about your mom, she said at last, in a voice so low it was almost carried away by the air from the fan. Valentina felt the floor shift beneath her feet, but she didn't fall. She didn't fall anymore. The laundry room at 10 o'clock at night smelled of hot soap and damp fabric. A single light bulb illuminated the back of the room. The machines were turned off. The silence was the kind of silence that weighs heavily. Carmen opened the old cabinet with a key she kept in her apron pocket. Inside, behind a pile of folded sheets that no one used, was a cardboard box tied with kitchen twine. She pulled it out slowly, like someone carrying something fragile, like someone who's been carrying it for years. Inside was a yellow envelope. She placed it in Valentina's hands without saying a word at first. Valentina held it. She felt the weight, light in grams, infinite in everything else. What is this? Carmen sat down on the wooden bench next to the machines. She clasped her hands in her lap. Your mom worked here 28 years ago. Her name was Elena Vasquez. She was a waitress, like me. A good girl, quiet, hard-working, with a smile that lit up the hallway when she arrived in the morning. Valentina squeezed the envelope. A man made her fall in love. Carmen continued in a flat voice, the kind she uses when the pain has been processed so many times that only the facts remain. A married man, with money, with lawyers. When Elena got pregnant, that man paid to make the problem disappear. He paid for her to sign papers. He paid for her to leave. And did my mom sign? Carmen looked at her. She was 20, honey. She had no one. She had no options. She signed because they left her no other way out. Valentina felt something break inside, not all at once. Slowly, like a seam giving way, thread by thread. Before she left, Elena left me that envelope. She told me that if her daughter ever showed up here, I should give it to her. She'd been waiting 22 years. When you arrived, with those eyes, with that way of walking, I knew it was you. But I was afraid. Forgive me for waiting so long. Valentina didn't answer. She opened the envelope with slow fingers. Inside were 3 things. A handwritten letter, a photo of a young pregnant woman smiling in front of the ocean, and a document with a legal letterhead. Valentina read the name on the document, and the world she had known up until that moment ceased to exist, because the name signing that paper acknowledging his paternity before paying to have her erased was the same name she had been hearing for 2 days in every conversation at that resort. Charles Whitmore, Ashley's father. Valentina didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed with Elena's letter in her hands and the photo resting on the pillow. The woman in the photo was smiling out at the ocean with a round belly and eyes squinted against the sun. Young, alone, not yet knowing what was to come. Valentina looked at her all night. She looked for the nose, the cheekbones, the way the shoulders sloped slightly forward, that posture of someone carrying something invisible but constant. She found it. She found herself in that photo, and that was the strangest and most painful thing of all, because for 28 years she had believed she was nobody's daughter. And it turned out she was the daughter of someone who had loved her, and also the daughter of someone who had paid not to love her. Both things at the same time, love and abandonment, tenderness and betrayal. Impossible to process one without stumbling upon the other. At 3 in the morning, she thought about giving up. Not in a dramatic way, but in that quiet, weary way known to women who have been holding on alone for too long. She thought about putting the envelope away, about not telling anyone anything, about continuing to wait tables or looking for another job or leaving Miami, or simply staying invisible because at least when you're invisible, no one hurts you with such precision. She almost decided to do it. But then she read the last line of Elena's letter. I didn't teach you to give up, because I didn't give up either. They took my options away, sweetie. They haven't taken any of yours away yet. Valentina folded the letter slowly. She put it back in the envelope. She turned off the light, and in the darkness she made a decision so quiet that no one heard it, but it changed everything. If this story is touching your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Every week we bring you stories like this, real stories of women who lost everything and found their way back. Click subscribe so you don't miss a single one. The next morning, she arrived at the resort with the envelope tucked away in her purse. She wasn't going to use it yet, but she wasn't going to leave it behind either. In the lobby, she ran into Lucas. He looked at her. He noticed something different about her, not in her clothes, not in her expression, but in her eyes. Something firmer, deeper. Are you okay? He asked in a low voice. Valentina looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't measure her response. Not yet, but I will be. Lucas opened his mouth to say something else. Valentina was already walking away, because she had learned something that night while reading her mother's letter, that there are moments that aren't meant to be shared just yet, that there are decisions that must first live inside before they can survive outside. And what Valentina Cruz had decided in the darkness of her room wasn't ready for the world yet. But the world was going to find out very soon. Eleanor Mercer arrived at the Meridian one Thursday without warning. No assistant, no extra luggage, a small suitcase and a folder of documents she carried herself, pressed against her chest, like someone who doesn't trust others to carry what matters. Lucas saw her enter the lobby, and something in her face changed. Not surprise, recognition. Like when you see a conversation coming that you knew would arrive but hoped would take a little longer. Mom, son, we need to talk. It wasn't a greeting. It was a statement. They sat in the indoor restaurant, far from the tables where the Whitmore families and their allies were having a noisy breakfast. Eleanor ordered tea. She opened the folder. She didn't waste any time. I've been investigating Whitmore Industries for 3 weeks, she said. Not because of you, for my own reasons. There's a merger your father considered years ago and that I blocked. I wanted to know if I'd been wrong. And I wasn't wrong. She passed the documents to Lucas. Hidden debt, inflated assets, contracts signed with shell companies that vanished before anyone could audit them. Charles Whitmore had spent years building an empire on worthless paper. Lucas read in silence, page by page. His coffee grew cold. There's something else, Eleanor said, and her voice changed. She grew stiller. The kind of stillness she used when what was coming wasn't business, but something older and heavier than any contract. I found payments. From 28 years ago, Charles Whitmore paid a woman named Elena Vasquez to sign a paternity waiver and disappear from Miami. Lucas looked up from the papers. Eleanor stared at him. Elena Vasquez died 2 years later in Mexico. She left a daughter. That daughter grew up with an aunt in Miami, and that daughter, Lucas, has been working at this resort for 6 years. The silence that fell between them was the kind that can't be filled with words. Lucas thought of the dark eyes that never looked away, of the voice that said, "Not yet, but I will be," of the way she carried herself, with that silent resolve of someone who learned on her own that the world gives nothing away. "Does she know?" he asked. Eleanor closed the folder. "That's what I need us to find out together." At that moment, on the other side of the resort, Diego was dialing a number on his cell phone. A reporter from a local tabloid who had covered scandals involving wealthy families before and who knew exactly how much a story involving a billionaire, a waitress, and a family secret was worth. The phone rang twice. Someone answered, and Diego began to speak. The resignation arrived at 7 in the morning. Collins was waiting for her at the service entrance with a white envelope and the same expression of a man who follows orders and prefers not to think too much about them. Valentina saw him from the end of the hallway and knew before she arrived. She recognized that envelope. She recognized that face. "Valentina, resort management has decided." He didn't finish the sentence. It wasn't necessary. She took the envelope. She opened it. She read the 2 lines that summed up 6 years of work in cold, administrative language. "Inappropriate conduct with a VIP guest. Contract terminated effective immediately." She put the paper away. She took off her name tag. She placed it on Collins's desk without slamming it down, without throwing it, with a delicacy that hurt more than any abrupt gesture. Collins didn't look up. Valentina went to the locker. She took out her purse. Elena's envelope was inside. She pressed it against her body. She walked out the service door. The Miami sun beat down without warning, as always. The street smelled of hot asphalt and fried food from the corner stand. The world remained the same, completely indifferent to what had just shattered inside that building. She walked half a block and stopped. She sat down at an empty bus stop. And there, with no one watching, she let her head fall into her hands. She didn't cry. She wanted to cry, but her body couldn't find the way. It was too much all at once. Her mother, her father, Ashley, her job, Diego selling the little he knew to whoever paid the most. She thought of Elena. "They took away my options, sweetie. They haven't taken any of yours away yet." She lifted her head. Her cell phone vibrated. "Diego. Cousin, the reporter wants the full story. Last chance. If you don't speak up, I will." Valentina looked at the message. She looked at the street. She looked at the envelope in her purse, and she understood that Diego was right about one thing. Someone was going to tell that story. The question was who? She typed a short reply, 4 words that made her fingers tremble but came out without hesitation. "Do whatever you want." She put her phone away. She took out the envelope. She opened it once more and looked at the photo of Elena facing the ocean. Young, alone, smiling at something Valentina could now name. Hope. She put the photo away carefully. She stood up. She had a call to make. Eleanor answered on the second ring. Valentina spoke without preamble. She told her everything, the envelope, the letter, the document with Charles's name, Carmen, the 28 years stored in a laundry closet. Eleanor listened without interrupting. When Valentina finished, there was a 5-second silence. Then Eleanor said, "Stay where you are, I'm coming for you." She arrived in 15 minutes, an unassuming car, no driver. She sat down next to Valentina at the bus stop as if it were the most natural place in the world for 2 women like them. Valentina handed her the document. Eleanor read it. Once. She folded it carefully and put it in her folder with the other papers. The ones about hidden debts, about fake contracts, about an empire built on lies. "Now we have everything," said Eleanor. "What for?" asked Valentina. "For tonight." Valentina looked at her. "The closing dinner is today. Charles is going to announce the merger. Ashley is going to be there smiling as if she'd won. And Lucas is going to have to make a decision in front of everyone. And me." Eleanor looked at her with that calmness that women have who've already been through the fire and know exactly how hot it burns. You're going to show up, with the envelope, with the truth, and you're going to let every person in that room understand exactly who you are. Valentina clutched her purse. It could destroy me. They already destroyed you this morning, Eleanor said without cruelty. The difference is that this time you choose how to fall. Silence. The street looked the same, the fried food stand, the hot asphalt, a pigeon walking in circles on the sidewalk, as if it too were wondering which way to go. Valentina thought of Ashley planting the bottle, of Collins with the white envelope, Diego with his cell phone ready to sell what didn't belong to him, Rosa telling her whole life that her mother abandoned her because she couldn't handle her. All lies, made up by people who needed her to believe she was small so they could feel big. "Okay," said Valentina. Eleanor nodded. "I'm going to talk to Lucas," said Eleanor, getting up. "You have until 8. She left. Valentina was left alone at the bus stop. She took out Elena's photo once more. The young woman facing the ocean, smiling at something invisible. Now Valentina knew what she was smiling at her. She put the photo away. She stood up and walked toward the resort with her heart beating differently, not faster, more steadily. The Meridian's ballroom shone as brightly as it had on the first night. The same crystal chandeliers, the same white tablecloths, the same scent of money and expensive perfume. But something inside had shifted, like when a single piece of furniture is moved in a familiar room, and suddenly everything seems different without knowing exactly why. Charles Whitmore presided over the head table with the authority of someone who has never been contradicted in public. Ashley to his right, in a white suit, a practiced smile. Lucas across from him, silent, with the unsigned documents in his jacket pocket. Eleanor at a side table, a folder on her lap. Untouched tea. Charles stood to speak. This week has been one of building, of vision, of the future. And tonight I am pleased to announce... Eleanor stood before he finished. The room turned to look. Before any announcement, she said in a clear, unhurried voice, "I believe everyone in this room deserves to know the truth about what is being offered." Charles flushed. Ashley tensed. Eleanor opened the folder. She spoke of debts, of inflated assets, of contracts with companies that didn't exist. Every number backed by a document, every document with a name and date. Ashley's father tried to interrupt twice. Both times Eleanor continued without looking at him. Like someone who knows the truth needs no permission to exist. When she finished with the numbers, she paused, and then she spoke of Elena Vasquez. The name fell across the room like a stone in still water. Charles Whitmore paled. Ashley looked at her father. Her father looked at the table. Eleanor told everything. The girl, the pregnancy, the lawyers, the money, the signed document. The woman who left and died alone 2 years later in Mexico, and the daughter no one looked for, who grew up in Miami, who worked for 6 years at that very resort, who was humiliated in that very room, who was fired that very morning to protect the woman who, unbeknownst to her, was her half-sister. Ashley opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The door to the room opened. Valentina entered. No uniform. Simple, clean, dignified clothes. Her crossbody bag slung across her chest. Elena's envelope inside. The room looked at her. Everyone. At the same time. And Charles Whitmore, for the first time in his life, didn't know what to do with his hands. Lucas stood up. He crossed the room without hurrying. He stopped in front of Valentina. He looked at her with that kind of attention she had learned to recognize, the kind that listens with the eyes. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. Valentina looked at him. "I didn't come for you," she said. "I came for her." She took Elena's photo out of the envelope. She held it for a moment, then she put it back, close to her chest, where it belonged. And she raised her eyes to Charles Whitmore. Charles Whitmore looked at her, and Valentina saw the exact moment when the man understood there was no way out. It wasn't dramatic. There was no scream. Just a 60-year-old man looking at a 28-year-old woman and seeing in her face everything he had paid to never see. But then something happened that no one expected. Ashley stood up. And instead of attacking, instead of defending herself, instead of doing what everyone expected of her, she said a single thing in a low voice that transformed the meaning of everything that had come before. I knew it. The room froze. Eleanor lowered her folder. Lucas looked at her. Valentina didn't move. Ashley's eyes were shining, not with arrogance, but with something older and more painful than that. I knew you existed, she said, looking at Valentina. My father told me when I turned 18. As a warning, he told me that if you ever showed up, we had to make sure you didn't get anywhere. The silence was absolute. That's why I asked for your reassignment, Ashley continued. That's why I planted the bottle. That's why I called the resort owner. It wasn't because of Lucas. It was out of fear. Because if the truth came out, everything my father built would crumble. And so would I. She sat down slowly, like someone letting go of a burden they've been carrying for years and finally can't take it anymore. Charles tried to speak. His lawyer placed a hand on his arm. Too late for words. Eleanor's documents were already on the table, the paternity document as well. And in that room full of people with phones and memories, there was no version of that night that Charles Whitmore could control. Valentina looked at him for a moment longer. She searched within herself for rage, hatred, the desire to say something that would destroy what remained of that man. She found none of that. Only a strange, clear calm, like after a long storm. She took Elena's envelope. She walked over to Charles's table. She placed it in front of him without saying a word. Let him carry that burden. It was his. She turned around. Lucas was 2 steps away. I know who I am, Valentina said in a low voice. I don't need anyone to confirm it for me. Lucas nodded. And what are you going to do now? Valentina looked around the room. The crystal chandeliers, the white marble, the same floor where she had picked up shards of glass on her knees while the world laughed. Live, she said. Finally. Lucas held out his hand. Valentina looked at it. She took it, not like a fairy tale princess, like a woman who walked through fire and decided not to get burned. 6 months later, Charles Whitmore faced 3 civil lawsuits and a federal investigation for financial fraud. The merger never happened. Whitmore Industries went into forced receivership. Ashley disappeared from Miami's social circles. No one knew exactly where she went. Some said she went abroad. Valentina never asked. Doña Carmen retired in December. Valentina organized the party. They cooked together in the small kitchen of Carmen's apartment, with norteño music playing in the background and the smell of fresh coffee filling every corner. Diego never sold the story. By the time everything came out in public, there was nothing left to sell. Rosa called him 3 times in a week. Valentina didn't answer any of them, not out of spite. Because some doors close without a slam. They simply close. Elena's letter was framed in the new apartment, on the wall across from the bed, where Valentina could see it every morning when she woke up. One night, Lucas found her standing in front of the frame, reading the last line in silence. "What does it say?" he asked. Valentina smiled at something invisible, that she didn't teach me to give up because she didn't give up either. Lucas said nothing more. He turned off the light, and outside, Miami remained the same. The hot asphalt, the still sea, the world completely indifferent to everything that had changed within that story. But inside, everything was different. Everything. If this story touched your heart, like this video right now. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our stories. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from, and what part touched you the most? I read every comment. See you in the next video.